All right, today we're going to talk about how to pass values from one stored procedure to the next stored procedure. And I'm going to go pretty quickly on this because there's a lot of coding to do here, and I'm going to actually type out all the code. One of the things I want to say really fast is that there are multiple ways to do this. I'm going to do this in a kind of a different method because the situation that I'm thinking of is one in which you cannot edit the original stored procedure, so you can't output something. Therefore, you can't always rely on being able to select something out of the stored procedure, but there's still a hack around it. So what I want to do is I'm going to create an initial stored procedure. This is going to be the first one that's going to tell us if today is a business day or if today is a weekday. So if you'll give me one moment, we'll call this biz day. And what we're going to do is we're going to declare a tiny int variable, and this is going to tell us what it is. Spell that backwards. And we're going to select w equal to, and for those of you who don't know, that this is a function that will tell us what we need. So when I do the date part function day week, this is going to tell me whether it's a weekday or a weekend. Now, I don't know if that's true for every country. In the US, at least where I live in the United States, or the way that I have this set up, weekends are 1 and 7, and then 2 through 6 are weekdays. But that may be different in different countries. I do not know off the top of my head if they change that. Okay, and actually I'm not going to do select, and in this case we want to select weekend. Else begin select weekday. So just really quickly, as you can see, this isn't super hard stuff. But basically, if W is in 1 and 7, it's a weekend. If W is in the rest or anything else, then it's not. So I will do execute this right here once it's created. And we can test it really fast, and we have weekday. So today is 2. And if you don't believe me, we can just do it this way, really fast. Select W, oops. So there you go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this, but what I want to do is put drop procedure, this right here. I'm going to clean this up afterwards. I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, so I'm going to delete this up here to clean my slate. All right, so we have a stored procedure in which returns whether today is a weekend or whether it's a weekday. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to create a table, and I'm going to call this table activity. And I'm going to have, let's see, one is day type. And I'm going to call this varchar 100. And then I'm going to have a column called activities, and I'll have varchar 102. Oops. And you'll see why in a second I'm doing this. Okay, so insert into, I'm going to only insert 2 values because I don't want to get this example too complicated. Insert into activity, values this, and values this and this. Okay, and so we're going to do weekday, and we're going to do weekend. And so weekday, we're going to say, say learning. We're going to say sailing. And we're going to say we'll say playing. Okay, so weekend we'll say learning, we'll say socializing, and we'll say resting. Okay, so we're going to do that, and we're going to insert those values. Okay. Now this time what I'm going to do here is just code those out. now we're going to create another procedure. And we're going to create a procedure called what should we do? And we'll do as and not as. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do our day type varchar 100. Now we'll do our begin. And so what we're going to do is we're going to select star. We're going to select, activities. We're going to select that from activity where day type equals day type. Okay, next thing we want to test really fast is execute this, and we're going to do weekend. And then weekday. Okay, sweet. Now I'm going to delete this too. Well, hold on. And again, you guys can just copy and, or not copy and paste, but you can just code this yourself and then play around with it. I'm using just two simple examples, but it can be really complicated. In fact, what I'm about to do, you could pass in dates, you could pass in integers, you could pass in decimals. I'm using varchars because it's kind of a simple example, but you can see how to pass one to another. Okay, actually I'm going to go ahead and delete this. All right, so I have my two procedures here. Now remember, what we found is if we execute this one, it says weekday. If we execute this one, it says what should we do, right? And we could technically, again, we could put everything into one procedure. But for this example, that would be a really bad idea. And also, where you're going to use passing a parameter from one procedure to the next, to the next, to the next, a lot of times is in testing. So again, it's using this really simple example. It makes sense. Well, why don't we just put it all into one procedure? But there are definitely some exceptions to that rule. And in fact, this is actually a fairly common question. How do I pass values from one procedure to the next? So there are numerous ways to do this. And in fact, you could even go in and edit a stored procedure to where it outputs a variable or outputs a value and grab that value. But one of the ways that I'm going to do is flexible to anything. It works pretty much with anything, and it's also very straightforward if you've watched some of the previous videos. So this isn't going to feel like something totally new. It's going to feel very little in terms of new. I'm going to create a temp table, and I'm going to call this table Z. And I'll tell you why I'm using just one letter categories. First of all, Z is because nobody creates a temp table anywhere called Z. It's one of my ways of minimizing errors in SQL Server is create all your temp tables starting with Z or ZZ or Z1Z. Nobody's ever going to do that. So you're not going to accidentally drop a table that you shouldn't drop anyway. Z is a letter that's very, very infrequently used in the English language. Okay, you'll notice I have an I variable and a V variable, and you'll see why in a second. What we're going to do is we're going to insert into this Z table, and we're going to insert only the V value. Now remember, varchar right here is 100, and weekday was 100 here. This is the variable that comes in here is 100, and what this spits out is just whatever. Then we're going to insert, we're going to execute our stp biz day. So we're going to insert into this Z table, the Z temp table, this value. And just to show you what that will look like, if you'll give me a second here. And by the way, you'll notice that there is a default value of 1. The only thing that this table exists for is to store one value. That's it. It does not exist for anything else. So there's that. There's that. I'm using 2008 R2, and it does work on SQL Server 2012. Okay, great. So we have select star. But remember, we're not actually wanting star. All we want is V, right? So if we select from Z, and again, you could actually You don't actually have to do the 1 here. You could actually just do the V in the table, but I'm doing the 1 intentionally. So the next step that we could do is we could declare a variable, and we could declare that variable to be varchar 100, and we could select v equal to v from z. And then we could select v just to prove what happened. 1 second. And we have weekday. Okay. Now we can do execute. We do. And we can do v. So let's look at this. So again, we have that one value, the weekday, in whatever this is. And actually, I'm going to do one thing here to drop table, and I'm going to do z. And you can see that our result is a weekday, and what we do on weekdays is we do learning, sailing, and playing, and then we drop the z table. So this is one very, very, very it's a little more complicated as a solution because we're not outputting anything, but let's suppose you cannot in any way, shape, or form edit the stored procedures. And just to show you, you could also do this a different way. You could actually have one value in the table. We've dropped the table, right? Yeah. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore. Good. And you could insert it into, so now you can get rid of v to make it even shorter. Insert into it, select v from z, and you could do this whole process again. And you'll see it executes. So for testing, and the way that this has been asked several times, one of my former companies, I had a colleague, and he was a C# designer. He wasn't into SQL Server at all. But he came to me and he's like, hey, I have 7 stored procedures I need to test. And how it works is it passes one value from one stored procedure. And then what it does is it goes to 3 stored procedures. And at the 3rd stored procedure, if it's one value, then I need it to do this. If it's another value, then I need it to do this. And it has to go from one to the next to the next to the next, because that's how C# works. And what he needed to do is come up with a way to code that in TSQL to test that on the back end to see if there was an error there before looking at the C#. And in fact, it did turn out that there was an error on the back end. And so by having a way to test that, and it was passing one variable to the next. Well, some of those stored procedures would output something, so you could grab that and run with it. But some of them didn't. And so he didn't know how to do this. And I had a couple of colleagues that were like, oh, I don't know how to do that. And I was like, well, this is a very simple, fast way. And you can see, I mean, some people might say, oh, well, it didn't take that long. I would just do it this way. But this is really still very simple, very fast coding. And you want to definitely make sure you drop your table, because if you don't and you insert it back into, now you have multiple values. That's where the 1 comes from. But as you can see, you can just go from one stored procedure to the next stored procedure. We have the first stored procedure being part of our insert statement, and then we have the new stored procedure taking on that new variable.